Aloha. This is Aloha. This is ThinkTech Hawaii, and this show is the state of Hawaii. And I welcome you to our bi-weekly program. And I'm your host, Stephanie Dalton. I'm very pleased to introduce a guest today, who is Larry Cohen, and he has served in many ways and accomplished many things relating to labor now and politics related to labor. As he started, he's recently retired from being president of the Communication Workers of America. He is acclaimed as a leading voice for workers' rights, for trade, for and also for getting big money out of politics. What we want to do today is talk about some of these labor topics and also Larry's transition to new positions. That's I think a political context for seeking and aiming to achieve the goals he already achieved in one role, and now he's in a new role and trying to achieve them at a bigger level. In other words, national level, because in his new role, Larry, your new role is with our revolution, and so you're joining many other candidates of Bernie Sanders on promoting those principles changes in our nation. So why don't we just start talking about how it is that you're going to be working for this kind of equity and social justice for all workers. Now, I don't know how much everybody knows and unions, so I think we're just talking maybe about how you got started with, and then how you moved on to the administration of it.
So I started, as a young worker, somewhat motivated, even in high school. I grew up in Philadelphia by the civil rights movement and the oppression in Philadelphia. The police commissioner at the time was quite famous for all the wrong things, Frank Rizzo, who went on to be mayor. And so anyway, I started with that, fighting racism, official racism in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, not Mississippi, not Philadelphia, Mississippi. And that shaped a lot of what I have always believed.
Well, you were in Mississippi.
No, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania had its own version of racism. The mayor himself, who started as the police commissioner, literally publicly denigrated African Americans. And as a high school student, I was at a demonstration at the Board of Education fighting for better schools. And he comes out of his car as police commissioner, and the police pour out of the bus, and he says, "Get their black asses." And they came out. This is Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the North. And they came out swinging their clubs, beating us, and killed one of the young black women. And he went on to be mayor for 2 terms. So
that is such a tragedy. Wow. And this was about in the 60s or 70s? That sounds
this was 1968, and he was mayor then from 1972 to 1980. So until I was 30 years old, a lot of what I was doing, even in the union, because it overlaps, was involved in Philadelphia fighting that mayor. He became the mayor with the same kind of hatred, appealing to the division between blacks and whites. And so when we look at today and racial justice and police killings, that was an everyday occurrence in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, not just Philadelphia, Mississippi, where people were murdered trying to register to vote. So anyway, that shaped me. And then as a young worker in the public sector, primarily, I took up the notion of what I call social justice unions and organizing. And where I worked in New Jersey, helped lead an organizing drive for 38,000 people. That's huge, obviously. It took 10 years, and that led me into the CWA. I became a staffer there and eventually ran first for executive vice president nationwide, and then for president, and was elected president in 2005, left in 2015 when the term ended, and brought those same values. It's not just union values about, how are people treated on the job, but also how can we who are organized work for racial, economic, social justice in America?
No,
That
that's really helpful. Okay, so that it's about how people are treated on the job. I think, there's a lot of confusion about what unions are all about, and there's a lot of publicity and disinformation out there. So you bring, it's more than passion. I mean, you went through tragedy, and that was very absolutely mind changing, I'm sure. So you spent that time in the union learning then how to organize and do good things for people and become a leader. I mean, in other words, you're acclaimed for recognizing early, the first to recognize early the needs of like the telecommunications workers, the the information technology people and media people, what their needs were, and they weren't being served well. And you brought attention to that and made a difference for that through your work in the
Yeah,
communication.
that was the major union work, including organizing new groups, um, huge new groups for most of that time, 40 years, focused on the union. And then decide, to me, 10 years as union president is enough. You move on, somebody else does it. And so then I got involved as what I call a full-time volunteer. I didn't want to work for Bernie Sanders. I had retired after 40 years in the union and told people in the union, I'm not looking for another job. But I basically volunteered full-time as a senior advisor. I could have been paid to Bernie in that campaign, but said to him at the beginning that I'm only going to do that if we're going to keep that going by organizing local groups and then keeping those groups going when this campaign is over. And that was in 2015. And he said to me at that time, Larry, I don't expect to be president. Now, he changed his mind about that because huge crowds showed up, including in Hawaii, but all over the country. Hawaii was a bastion of his support, actually. I spent a lot of time in Iowa because of the nature of that primary process with working people, union and not. But anyway, my aim was always on when it ends, and he got much closer than anyone expected, but also brought those messages into the Democratic Party, healthcare for all, not just Obamacare, but we need real change on healthcare, right? Student debt, medical debt, tragedies, horrible. No early childhood education, no senior care, long-term care. You have to pay for it, or you have to be impoverished and get it through Medicaid. So these are big issues. And the people that we organized through that campaign, the idea was we're going to keep this going. Not about Bernie Sanders for many reasons. He couldn't really be involved in it. There's Senate rules about that. It's a membership-based nonprofit. Senators can't run those or be involved. But not about him, but about the values, about the ideas, and about elections. So we look at three things: elections, issues, and transforming the Democratic Party. And the Hawaii Party is near the top in terms of democracy in the Democratic Party there, and has always had people in that party leadership that actually supported overall party reform. So anyway, that's what our revolution is about. It's about 600 groups around the country. Continues. It's now 5 years old, well beyond the Bernie Sanders, both campaigns, and focused on, social, racial, environmental, economic justice.
Well, that's very, very clarifying in numerous ways. I mean, in your listing the issues, the intolerance, and the actual kind of institutional racism that is out there, and that we're trying to work on improving, actually deleting, if possible. So you've been on. You actually were the politician first, and then the union organizer and leader, and now you're kind of coming back to the politics of it to try and work on these issues right at the much larger level, so that Bernie Sanders' campaign is giving you that credibility, right? So moving forward,
Yeah.
the aims are, you've got much more behind you, right, in the way of stance and voice and soapbox, right? So how
Yeah. Yes.
really hard stuff. I mean, like one thing you've mentioned in write-ups and everything is the filibuster. And I'm not saying that has to be talked about in detail. I'm just saying, how do you manage to think about something as hard how do you bring your powers to bear, your powers of influence to bear on such a hard topic of change?
Well, so democracy is a problem here, right? We have an 18th century democracy. It's the oldest of the large nations anyway. And it's a relic in many ways. So the Electoral College, how the Senate functions, how the Senate gets elected. And so if your focus is on an issue, say it's on climate change, and we have 50 Republicans in the Senate in denial, while we have floods all over the world and forest fires in the Western US, and the earth is heating up, right? Glaciers melting. But, we have 50 senators, half of them in total denial. And we have a structure that says that even though a majority is ready to act, they can't do it without a supermajority, even though the Constitution particularly didn't want that to be. That was the Articles of Confederation that preceded the Constitution. They learned that we need majority rule. People need to be able to act and govern. We're here to govern, not to vote and then not govern. So I got involved in that issue, Senate rules reform 10 years ago in the Obama camp, when Obama was in the White House, and we had 60 Democratic senators, but then we really didn't, without going into all the details. Senator Kennedy had a seizure, never could come back. We had 59, and we only had 60 for a couple of months. So, and then we didn't have 59 because of the elections in 2010. And so this notion that even with 55, 56 Democratic senators, or even if they were Republicans, you can't govern because of not the Constitution, not the amendment that created the modern Senate in 1920, but a practice. This is like in any organization, you develop your rules of the day. Like in CWA, we had huge national meetings and we had rules for those meetings. We had majority rules. We didn't have super majorities. But so that's how we come to that. If you're focused on expanding Medicare, it's a big issue for us and for people right now. There's majority support in the House and barely majority in the Senate to bring down the age of Medicare to 60. Let's take that as an example. You can't put a bill on the floor of the Senate. You can't even put it on the floor without 60 votes. It's not a filibuster. You can't discuss. What we want to see next week for the first time in 40 years is what we call a standing, because they have to stand to talk, but a talking filibuster. If they want to filibuster, the minority is going to have to speak. And when they give up the floor, then the motion, in this case, the Democracy Bill for the People Act, Senate Bill 1, will then move forward on voting rights at a time when almost 20 states since just this year have restricted voting rights. They've knocked out early voting and limited it to where it's a farce. They've cut down on vote by mail, and they've put more barriers in the way of voter registration. No other democracy in the world has voter registration. You show up with an ID on election day in every other country and you vote. These are all designed. They're relics from the civil rights era, the segregation era, to hold down voting, not just the Black people, but young people, immigrants. And that's another whole story. 20 million immigrants who can't vote. 150 years ago, when my family on both sides came here, they couldn't wait, the ward leaders in Philadelphia, to sign them up to vote. Now we have 20 million people with no vote who would all vote, more or less in a progressive way because of their own situation in life. So these issues are held up by the way the Senate operates. And again, Hawaii has 2 senators that are in the progressive majority, as well as every member of Congress. But that's not the norm.
Yeah. No. Well, that is very informing. I have a question that might rise from my naivety on these topics, but is there, because a lot of this is driven by, of course, the big money, and the big money is one of your issues. And
Right.
but on my understanding of unions is one of the benefits of unions, or advantages, is that they can galvanize a lot of support, the passion, and exactly what your parents had, and we all use to influence our votes. But also, it's a way to get contributions and build up the money. So, is there a contradiction here between getting big money out of politics, and that unions have been big players with big money? Is that the case?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some, so first of all, if we were going to clear the field, that would be an interesting thing as part of clearing the field. But let's look at what goes on. So a wealthy hedge fund I can name names, you know, Paul Tudor Jones. He was an originator of hedge funds. He can spend politically tens of millions of dollars a year personally, one human being, have way and outside, and he's part of a group called No Labels. That's a huge, big money organization. Tens of millions of dollars. One person. There's no limit. That's part of what we have to reform. The House passed a bill that would at least force disclosure on those things and offset it with some public funding. So in a union, with some exceptions in some states, but on federal elections, unions cannot use union funds. They have to get separate voluntary funds from members to contribute. And even then, it's limited to $5,000 for a primary and $5,000 from each union, the whole union. So it is true that one of the things unions have done since the 1940s is raise money to try to offset the power of what were millionaires, now billionaires, in the political arena. But, again, my union, when Citizens United came up, we were an advocate, we were on the losing side. We were on the side that said Congress needs to be able to regulate big money in politics. We just supported and still support, public funding as an offset. So if you take public money, you can't take this big money. But yeah, we're not going to get that done this year because even in the Democratic caucus of the Senate, at least two senators, the senator from Arizona, Kyrsten Sinema, and the senator from West Virginia, Joe Manchin, don't support disclosure. This is just disclosure. So people would see, well, where's this money coming from that this candidate takes? And then how does the elected official, who was the candidate, behave based on the money they got? And, you look at, again, Hawaiians are great on the environment. Fossil fuel money is an obscenity in terms of how they impact our Congress. And one of our big issues right now in our revolution, but also Greenpeace, all our allies, again, it would be totally popular in Hawaii, is eliminate the subsidies for fossil fuel companies. They're getting tens of billions of dollars to drill new oil wells while the White House and others talk about climate change. It's total hypocrisy. No other country in the world pays for new drilling. In fact, in Europe now, the European-based fossil fuel companies have to phase out oil drilling and invest. I'm talking about British Petroleum. I'm talking about Total. That was my dog. The dog says, "Oh, you're too excited, Larry." They have to shift to renewables. Here, we're paying them to drill new oil wells while we talk about climate change. So why has that happened? Because the oil companies are gigantic lobbyists and pour not only money into elections, but hire thousands of lobbyists every day to go and visit these people that we elect in Washington. So, again, let me just shout out Hawaii. It's like the other extreme. There are states where you see much closer to real democracy, and the elections show it, and you have people who fight, Shatz, Harona, for real justice on every single issue. But, so you could be frustrated. You could say, hey, I'm a Hawaiian, and we support these things. Look who we elect, and none of them get done. Well, part of that is how does the Senate operate? Part of it is the role of money, the role of lobbyists. And yeah, if you gave me one wish, that's what I would wipe out, because that's the source of why we don't have Medicare for all. That's the source of why we have obscene student debt and not enough funding for education, which I know has been your passion, from early childhood to professional education. So, we got to have the democracy. Right now, though, we're also fighting to try to get certain things done in this budget bill, which can only be done once or twice a year. This year, twice, without getting into the weeds. That only needs 50 votes in the Senate, majority in the House.
So with your, now you led this enormous union, okay?
Yeah.
The largest of them all. Okay, now
one of the largest.
Well, yeah, but 700,000, I think, is they say. This is But okay, but now our revolution is a newer organization.
Yes, so, 5 years old. Yeah.
And how much heft have you got there? Is it anything like?
So all the money that we raise comes from grassroots donors, and we have hardly anybody who gives more than $1,000. So most people give, I'd say more like $30 a year. There's about 100,000 donors. There's about 6 million people that get email. There's about, I'd say 2 million that are active in some way. There's about 500 groups. Some people are active as individuals, some are in a group. Some states have well organized, but that all came from the 2016 Bernie campaign and then what we built since. And it's actually better now than ever. We have a big election next week, Ohio 11, which is Cleveland and Akron, where our former full-time leader, here now the dog wants to be in the picture. Our former, our full-time leader, here she is. There she is.
Well, hello. Yeah. Yeah.
Nina Turner is running for Congress on Tuesday, and I'm pretty confident we're going to win that vote. But that would be an example. We have 5,000 supporters in that district, revved up, ready to vote on Tuesday. And that's a big, now she's got another toy. And that's a big part of what it takes to win. You'll win a primary like that with about 20,000 votes. So
Yeah.
our theory, our strategy is, everyday people join. If they want to contribute, they can. We ask people to contribute because we have staff. We've got to pay them. The board is all volunteers. The board has people like Keith Ellison, the Attorney General of Minnesota, Jane Klebb, who's the state party chair of the Democratic Party and a national environmental leader from Nebraska, Jim Hightower, popular leader from Texas. It's only 8 people on the board, me and 7 others. Deborah Parker, a Native American leader. Anyway, now I've named too many, but without naming all. But the board is volunteers, but there is a full-time staff, and then there's a lot of part-time staff who live in different places to help organize. Like in this congressional election, we have local organizers mobilizing those 5,000 people.
So that is your major challenge. It's bigger than a challenge, but in other words, all of you working at that level and planning and policy making for your organization, how you're going to disseminate. How are you going to, deploy? Right. So if people go to ourrevolution.com, you'll find the weekly newsletters, or you just sign up. It's free. The Saturday newsletter, there'll be one tomorrow, goes over what happened this week all over the country and what's going on next week. There'll be a big focus this time on this Ohio congressional special election to fill a vacancy. But it's education, it's organizing, and then it's action. Action is electoral politics. Action is issue mobilization. Action is going into the Democratic Party and a lot of the states, particularly in the East, and pushing to democratize the Democratic Party, or the Senate caucus changing the way it does business so that, they can actually get something on the floor. Or I was active at the DNC, Democratic National Committee, to get rid of superdelegates, of which I've been one since 2005. Take them out of the nominating process, which we did in 2018. They were not in the nominating process in 2020. Now we're fighting to make sure that doesn't change. So we fight to change the Democratic Party. Again, Hawaii, there's not a lot to change, but overall, nationally, and in most states, keep it democratic, small d. We work to elect progressive people who support the key issues, but we're motivated by these issues. People aren't motivated by elections. It's not a baseball team, where we want to see our team win. There's a little bit of that, but it's mostly we want to elect people who help build the movement so that we win on the issues, so that we're happier. We're happier if we have better healthcare, if our kids can go to college, if our parents are taken care of when they're old. It's the only country of any democracy with no long-term care, unless you have the private funds or you're impoverished. Everybody in between, it's like a giant donut, is on their own for long-term care. And wake up, America, most of us are going to need it ourselves or our parents. And I know you went through that yourself. So I mean, I'm hearing you saying some things about that what you mentioned in the beginning, which is very informative, about moving out of the 18th century democracy that we're trying to still play here, and the corruption that has come into it, and how that is going to get the movement to affect the elections. And one out here in the world talking about that election that was recently held and that the Democrats won. Everybody's talking about that as being another little chink in the glass, right?
Right.
And so this one, Ohio, sounds like this is the next one that could be another chink in the glass for breaking down.
And I think there've been a series of those. I mean, Pramila Jayapal leads the Progressive Caucus in the House. Born in India, she represents Seattle. She's the chair. My dog is getting every toy that squeaks.
Okay, he wants attention. He doesn't like
Yes.
having all the.
I now have 4 squeaky toys on my table so that the dog can't use them.
Well, why,
Um,
listen,
uh,
yeah, go
But
ahead.
what I was going to say is Pramila Jayapal leads that caucus from Seattle. And our strategy is to build that caucus so that the caucus can adopt an agenda that represents this kind of progressive, but real politics, the real politics that we should be adopting that supermajority support, not like Fantasyland politics. And so there's 94 people in that caucus. Issues like expanding Medicare has 170 of the 220 Democrats on it. It's going to come to bear in this next budget bill. I'm reasonably optimistic about it. So the strategy is that the elections build that majority, particularly in the House, and that majority of the Democratic caucus then pushes for change, and that it's not hopeless, it's hard, and that we can get these big things done, if not this year, soon.
Well, that is encouraging to know that that's in progress, Larry. So thank you for the effort and that's really hard work. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the article in the Advertiser today in Honolulu? I think that.
Yeah, so that was an Associated Press story, and it's a little bit ironic because it's saying our revolution on its 5th anniversary is, quote, rebranding as Pragmatic Progressives. Well, everything just for myself, everything I've ever supported is pragmatism. Pragmatism means you're there to solve problems that are real for human beings so that we have better lives, so that more people will get involved to solve problems. So the theory is more people get involved, we can solve more problems. We have better support politically and also on issues. So that the article is really about that. It does talk a lot about the election on Tuesday, Nina Turner running in Ohio 11. It talks about Medicare expansion and basically says, and quotes me from, we have national calls with 4,000 or 5,000 people every Monday night. And in the one 2 weeks ago where I was introducing Nina, who I know forever, but I was also talking about this budget bill that's coming up. And I was saying, because we have people who say, why isn't it Medicare for all, the whole thing? And I was saying, no, this is what we can get done this year. It's a huge step forward. So that's what they're feeding off of in that article that appeared today in Hawaii. And it's an AP story. It's in many, many publications and TV, blah, blah, blah.
Well,
so they're claiming that we're not the radicals of Bernie Sanders, that we're pragmatic progressives. Well, to me, that's what it's always been. Nothing changed. And we're not changing the name. We call it our revolution because this is part of a political revolution. We've got to get out of the 18th century.
It's a worthy goal. And I think that's an interesting line and very helpful to understand what some of these impediments are. Because most of us out here that aren't wrapped up in it like you are, maybe passionate about it, but the details and the way it works is, and that's why I appreciate your coming on today, because
Sure.
what the innards are, what sausage making. And I think you've really done a nice job of explaining what it is that has to happen and how much work it takes. And God bless you, because that's big. And never has been bigger. I guess maybe it has been, but in our time, we haven't had as much of this challenge over politics, or maybe we have, but it's a big job to do. I think that Hawaii is maybe they'll take an interest in you in the article because, it was the first state that had Medicare for all. And, and
closest to it.
Yeah. So, and before we got Massachusetts, care out and up, that blew Hawaii off the map of getting any attention for having a good idea early on. But good. Well, I'm really glad to look forward to the article and recommend that to all our viewers so that they can understand how this work happens. And you're going to get us there because we're really all worried about getting us there because we all need it. And that's what we have in common. And that's unifying. And that's what our president is about. And the more we understand, the better we're going to.
No, that's right.
Got to put the energy in. Yeah. So I think that we're getting close to the end of our brief session on ThinkTech here. Is there anything in particular that you would like to address?
No, I would just say to people in Hawaii, keep it up. Hawaii is, what we aspire to in many, many different ways. I don't want to, I have a lot of friends in Norway. I often talk that way about Norway. They say, Larry, we're still working for change here. Well, it's the same thing in Hawaii, but compared to the rest of the country, we can't get disheartened, because if we give up and give in, then we're not going to get there, because the people who are paid every day to take positions, especially by billionaires, whether it's Bezos or the bankers or, the bastards, or I could keep going with B words, they don't give up because they're paid to do it, and they have paid media. So we have to do it with everyday people. And the way I like to say it is, if people could put a few hours a week into political change, we're going to make monumental changes in America that we support. Nothing that radical, just the core things that we all support about our kids, about our families, about our environment, about social justice, racial justice. Again, the things that are obviously dear to people in Hawaii, but we need to have a country that's really based on that, that's looking forward, not back to, many of the problems that we started with, like slavery and genocide of Native Americans, et cetera. We got to look forward to, we're all in the same boat, and let's steer that boat in a good, positive direction.
That's great. And this is the real reform. I see that come up every now and then, that, what is the real reform that we need to do? And that's a way of giving us a label for all of this that has to, because the founders couldn't do everything. They didn't do everything. And so we have to take that burden on and make it better. Okay, well, I thank you so much, Larry.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And since it is aloha time, we'll have to close. But this is the State of Hawaii show on ThinkTech Hawaii. And we are here with Larry Cohen, who's now with Our Revolution, formerly the president of the Communications Workers Association of America, and a very obviously energized and targeted and dedicated for America. So thank you so much. And aloha.
My pleasure. Thank you. Aloha.
See you in 2 weeks. Okay.
A democracy movement is necessary if we are to move forward towards economic justice. That one by one, and that list grows, it blocks the road to justice if we don't fight the fight for democracy.
That's right. That's right.
Without this movement for democracy that will unite us all, our individual fights, no matter how just, can't be realized. Money in politics. Again, a 5-4 decision. 4 years of these decisions from this Supreme Court, 5-4. And so when we think that elections don't make a difference, even that one thing shows they make a difference. But also, elections are not sufficient. We can't just wait and vote. These 2 days are about building a mass movement so that we vote for people who have our values, who share our narrative, who have our dreams.